South does quite dramatically illuminate some of the quite substantial transformation processes that are underway. We talked about the stickiness, but the South really illustrates the extent to which some of the past patterns have been at least partially erased. The South doesn't provide a lens on some of the other interesting patterns. For instance, looking at the short description for this panel, there are no informal settlements in the southern suburbs, for reasons we can talk about. There are actually very few informal settlements on the mining belt, which intrudes into the southern suburbs, which is very unlike Ekurhuleni, for example, and other parts of Joburg. What we're doing is that we're situating the development of the southern suburbs, the contemporary processes in terms of the long sweep of history, really about the layering of identity as one group moves in, another group partially moves out. And if you look at urban scholarship in Johannesburg, the focus has been on the space of the black working class, the immense resources provided by the Wits History Workshop, for example, or more recently on some of the glitzy spaces, not necessarily the mundane spaces, but some of the more glitzy spaces in the north. But there's been really little attention to the seemingly mundane spaces in the city, including the historically white working class spaces. Of course, they no longer can be defined as such. And yet we argue that the southern suburbs does provide a window into a range of identities and social groups, and is a means through which to explore socio-spatial processes, some of them at least. This just shows, in the period 1886 to 1900, the core of the Old South developing, the trams arriving, which sustained the growth of the Old South, the development there of Welfare Park. Then after the war, 1946 to 1960, you have the first prototype of middle-class suburbs, Mondial and Robertsham, and you also have other, if I can use the term, poor white estates, mainly for railway workers and industrial workers like Tulisa Park, a view of La Rochelle. This is part of the core of the Old South, which was really marked out for the working class, skilled artisans living in bungalows with strict gridiron street layouts. But what was interesting in terms of identity was the unusual mix of ethnic groups in the area. If you look at the west of Joburg, the working class areas, it was predominantly Afrikaner. If you look at the east, it was predominantly Lithuanian Jewish. If you look at the central belt along the ridge, it was predominantly English working class, Brixton and so on. What was different about the southern suburbs was that there were very few Jews in the southern suburbs, but apart from that was the extraordinary ethnic mix of the white working class, and that really played a part in terms of shaping a particular identity. What is interesting about Umanda is that the first townhouses in Johannesburg were developed in Umanda as a result of that plan, on a very modest scale, and this sort of Spanish-style townhouses. And so what is happening in Umanda, it's an unexplored area in terms of research, right at the interface with Soweto, plan for white middle class. And this is suggestive, I think, of new societies emerging, but it's unexplored. We've identified four sort of major trends that are reshaping the southern suburbs. The one is this rapid expansion of the interface zone between Soweto and the southern suburbs that's driven largely by the rise in the movement of the black middle class. Secondly is a very fraught spatial transition in the Old South, the core of the Old South, with new immigrants from across Africa partially, not entirely, displacing established residents. And I'll show you that there are counter-narratives in terms of what is happening there. Then there are new patterns of development in the New South. As well, the mainly white middle class, but it's becoming more and more racially mixed, retreats into secure enclaves, but for the purpose really of this seminar, this workshop, it's really, what's important is that it is suggestive, we think, of new socio-spatial formations, obviously, but formations that are situated in a long history. So nothing is